A single black father drives his intoxicated boss home after the company's holiday party. But when she finally wakes up the next morning, her first words shatter the air like glass. As she shouted, "You didn't think I'd figure it out, did you?" Claire Whitman stood stiff at the door, her voice icy and sharp. In her hand, a phone, lit up with a blurry but damning photo. Her eyes, cold, calculating, locked onto him like a loaded weapon. "A man like you in my home, taking advantage while I was too drunk to stand." Daniel Brooks didn't move, didn't blink. He sat at the edge of the desk, hands steady, gaze unwavering. 34 years old, a quiet man with calloused hands and tired eyes, raising his 8-year-old daughter on his own. 5 years at this company. Never late, never a problem. Always respectful. Always the one staying late to finish what others left behind. And this was how it turned on him. "Ms. Whitman," he said calmly, voice low but firm. "You were completely out of it. I only got you home. That's all I did. Nothing more." She let out a dry laugh, cold and bitter. Her eyes narrowed. "How convenient," she said slowly, voice thick with sarcasm. The loyal employee driving his helpless boss home. And then, well, we all know what happens when no one's watching. The accusation hung in the air like poison. Daniel felt it, his heart racing, his fists clenching beneath the desk. But on the surface, he didn't flinch. He couldn't. Not now. Because he knew what was at stake. And it wasn't just his job. Daniel had learned to spot it over the years. The quiet jabs, the veiled insults. Claire never said anything outright, but the message was always there. Remarks like, "You're lucky to have landed a job here," said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The constant double-checking of his work, even when it was flawless, while others, less thorough, sailed through unchecked simply because they didn't look like him. He stayed composed, even now. "There must be some kind of mistake," Daniel said, his voice calm, even though his chest was burning. Claire leaned in, her expression sharp, her voice low. "No mistake. You crossed a line, invaded my space, embarrassed me, and now you'll pay." Her eyes narrowed. "I could report this as harassment, Daniel. It's your word against mine. And let's be honest, who do you think they'll believe?" The silence that followed was heavy. Daniel studied her face, the smug certainty, the satisfaction of holding power she thought was absolute. She didn't know that he had quietly recorded everything, every moment from the night before. From the second he found her crying in the company restroom to the moment he helped her safely into her home, keeping his distance, speaking respectfully, never once crossing a line. "What if I told you I have proof?" he asked softly. Claire scoffed. "Proof? You think someone like you could challenge someone like me?" Daniel smiled. A small, knowing smile. The kind you wear when you've played the long game and the final move is yours. She had underestimated him, his intelligence, his patience, his quiet strength. While she rattled on about consequences, legal action, and how quickly he could be replaced, Daniel's thoughts drifted. To his daughter at home. To the silent struggles he faced every day. And to the file he'd been building for years. Emails, voice memos, offhand comments, all of it. Kindly do us a quick favor. Please hit that like and subscribe button if you are touched by this story. Your support keeps us creating and sharing more powerful stories as this one. Thank you. Now, let's get back to our story. Claire didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just about one night. This was the moment everything changed. Because Daniel wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was ready to expose the truth. When Daniel walked into the office that Monday morning, the energy had shifted. It was in the way people looked through him instead of at him. The half-finished greetings. The whispers that stopped the moment he stepped into the room. Something was off, and he knew exactly who was behind it. Claire had wasted no time. She'd sown quiet doubt expertly, like she'd done this before. Not with direct accusations, those were too easy to disprove, but with just enough suggestion to stain his name without a single fact. Daniel, a voice called softly. Tasha from HR stood at his desk, her expression tense. He hadn't even powered on his computer. We need to speak. Privately. As he walked behind her down the corridor, the hallway felt longer than usual. Colleagues he'd laughed with just last week suddenly couldn't meet his eyes. Like he'd turned invisible, or worse, radioactive. Inside the HR office, the ambush was waiting. Claire sat poised at the table, calm, composed, and smug. Two company attorneys flanked her like sentries. Her smile didn't touch her eyes. It didn't have to. It was the kind of smile someone wore when they believed the outcome had already been decided. Mr. Brooks, Tasha began, her voice uneasy. There's been a complaint. Ms. Whitman claims you acted inappropriately after the company event. She's provided a photo. Daniel didn't blink. What photo? He asked, tone neutral. Claire casually slid her phone across the table. On the screen, an image of her in bed, slightly ruffled, clearly alone. You left me like this, she said, voice low and theatrical. In that state, completely vulnerable. Alone with a man I barely know. Daniel studied the photo, without emotion. And who took this? He asked. I did, she answered quickly. Right after I woke up and realized what happened. He nodded once. That was her first misstep, and he filed it away. What Claire didn't realize was that Daniel had been preparing for moments like this his entire life. Losing his mother at 12 and bouncing through foster care taught him early how fragile trust was, how fast people could turn. He learned to protect himself with facts, not feelings. Later, in the army, he mastered discipline, observation, and silence, the kind of silence that lets you study your enemy before making a move. And now, as a father to Leah, the bright-eyed little girl who looked up to him like he hung the stars, he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was strategic. He was cautious. And he was ready. Because in places like this, where a black man's reputation could be destroyed by a whisper, he'd learned to keep receipts. And this time, he had all of them. Mr. Brooks, Tasha said, her tone now more official. Do you understand how serious these allegations are? This could lead to a suspension without pay while we look into the matter. Daniel nodded slowly, his voice calm but heavy. Let me guess, her version holds more weight than mine. Claire leaned in, her smile small but sharp, like a blade hidden in plain sight. Daniel, she began sweetly, you've always done solid work. But sometimes men in your situation misread the room, especially when they're around powerful women. The room seemed to shrink with those words. Her voice was soft, but laced with a venom he knew too well. It was the same tone he'd heard from caseworkers growing up, the same doubt-filled phrasing from commanding officers who never saw him as a leader, the same patronizing remarks from college professors surprised that he, a black man with his background, had outperformed expectations. Right, Daniel murmured, almost to himself. Single dad, raised in the system, made it into this company by some miracle of charity. I guess it's easy to assume a man like me would forget where the line is when he's standing next to someone like her. The room fell silent. Tasha shifted in her chair, clearly uncomfortable. The lawyers, as always, remained unreadable. But Claire? She was glowing. She savored every second, believing she'd backed him into a corner he couldn't escape. But Daniel wasn't cornered. He was watching, listening, waiting. And the game wasn't over. Daniel's mind wandered briefly to Leah. That morning, she'd looked up at him with her big, curious eyes and asked, Daddy, why do you look sad today? Then added quietly, You always say the good guys win in the end. He smiled at the memory. He'd bent down, kissed her forehead, and told her exactly what she needed to hear. That they do. One way or another, they always do. Turning back to the room, Daniel spoke up with quiet clarity. Ms. Whitman, do you mind if I ask something? She raised a brow, cautious. Go ahead. At the party, you mentioned your former assistant, Meena Patel. Said she tried to pull the race card when she was let go. Claire's shoulders tensed. That has nothing to do with this conversation. I think it might, Daniel replied, because Nina reached out to me last week. Said she's filing a lawsuit, racial discrimination, and she's got some interesting recordings of your conversations. The shift in Claire's expression was instant. Her face paled slightly before she regained her mask. Nina's bitter. She's lying. No one's going to believe her. Daniel smiled again, calm, steady, with a trace of something deeper behind it. You could be right, he said. Who's going to believe an Asian woman over a respected executive like yourself? The words landed with weight. Even Claire knew she'd walked right into her own logic. The same argument she'd weaponized against others now sat squarely in her lap. Tasha's voice broke the silence. What exactly are you suggesting, Daniel? He stood up slowly, no anger, just precision. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm simply pointing out how quickly assumptions are made, depending on who's speaking. And just like that, the room shifted again. As Daniel stepped out of the room, he could hear Claire's hushed, angry voice behind him, murmuring rapidly to the company lawyers. She had no clue what was really unfolding. For the past 2 years, Daniel had been quietly collecting everything. Every offhand remark she thought no one would remember, every dismissive glance, every policy decision that always seemed to disadvantage people who looked like him. She thought it was subtle. It wasn't. Every word she spoke in that meeting, every smug, condescending sentence, was captured by the recording app running on his phone. Her arrogance, her bias, her thinly veiled threats, all saved. But what Claire never realized was that Daniel wasn't just another name on the payroll. He held a master's in information systems and had built more than just databases. He'd built connections. People in the press, lawyers who lived for this kind of fight, and advocates who thrived on exposing exactly this kind of injustice. What she really did, was cross a line no one gets to cross. She came after his livelihood, his reputation, and by extension, his daughter. And when you threaten a man who's already lost everything once, who's clawed his way back for the sake of a little girl who believes her dad can do anything, you don't just create an enemy. You create a storm. That afternoon, while Claire toasted her so-called win, Daniel was at home at the kitchen table, helping Leah with fractions, while mapping out every step of a plan she never saw coming. By Tuesday, Claire had moved quickly to lock in her version of events. Daniel was formally suspended, no pay, pending investigation. By Wednesday, a quiet memo made its rounds among upper management, suggesting close monitoring of at-risk employees. By Thursday, Daniel got the notice. He was barred from entering the building until further notice. She thought the game was over. It hadn't even started. What Claire didn't realize was that Daniel hadn't spent the past 3 days sulking. He'd been moving. Carefully. Deliberately. And every move was part of a larger strategy he'd been quietly building for months. His first call wasn't to just any lawyer. It was to Rachel Kim, a powerhouse attorney known for dismantling corporations that thrived on discrimination and secrecy. When he introduced himself, her tone shifted. Daniel Brooks? I've heard your name. Meena Patel mentioned you. Said you might have something worth seeing. I've got more than something, Daniel said. I've got proof. Inside Rachel's office, Daniel opened his laptop and began showing her exactly what he meant. Neatly organized files. Rows of data. Spreadsheets that revealed a pattern. Black and Latino employees consistently rated lower, overlooked for promotions, and second-guessed at every turn. Meanwhile, white employees with weaker records moved up without resistance. Rachel leaned in. This is thorough, she muttered. How long did this take you? 2.5 years, Daniel replied. Ever since I started noticing the pattern. He clicked open a second folder. But that's just the surface. Rachel's eyes widened as she scanned through what came next. screenshots from internal chats, emails laced with coded language and subtle prejudice, and then the audio file. A 23-minute recording. An executive meeting. Voices captured clearly, Claire's among them, talking strategy. How to appear inclusive without actually changing anything. How to hire just enough to check the box. How to keep standards intact. Rachel looked up slowly. How'd you get your hands on all this? Daniel didn't flinch. Let's just say, I learned a long time ago not to trust power that hides behind smiles. For the first time in days, Daniel allowed himself a quiet smile. Let's just say, he told Rachel, 5 years in IT before I became an analyst taught me a few tricks about how things really work behind the scenes. When you're constantly left out of key meetings, you learn to stay informed another way. Meanwhile, across town, Claire sat in her office, basking in what she thought was victory. She made calls to other executives, boasting about how she had handled a potential issue before it spiraled. She didn't know every word was being captured, live, by a monitoring program Daniel had quietly installed months ago. The thing about men like him, Claire said during a call with Janice McAllister, a regional director, is they don't know where they stand. They grow up thinking they're owed the same respect as people who've actually achieved something. Janice laughed. Well, at least you dealt with him before he started playing the race card. Those cases are a nightmare. Exactly, Claire agreed. That's why I moved quickly. A single black man's word against mine? Let's be honest, credibility still wins in the end. What she didn't realize was that Daniel was listening. Every call, every word, each statement transcribed, date stamped, and quietly archived. Claire wasn't covering her tracks. She was laying them. That same afternoon, Rachel called back, her voice sharper this time. Daniel, I've got something big. The Justice Department just opened a preliminary review into corporate discrimination. Your company's on the radar. She paused, letting it land. If we position this right, your files could be more than evidence in a lawsuit. They could be key to a federal investigation. Daniel nodded slowly, glancing toward the kitchen, where Leah sat at the table scribbling on her math workbook. She had asked earlier, Daddy, why are you home today? He'd smiled and said, just sorting out some things at work. She looked at him with the kind of worry only children can hide in a soft voice. Will it be okay? He reached over, brushed her curls gently, and said what he always believed deep down. It will be, sweetheart. People can get away with being cruel for a while, but the truth always has a way of showing up. Leah had simply nodded and gone back to her math, fully trusting in her father's words. That quiet faith, that unshaken belief in him, was the fuel behind Daniel's resolve. This fight wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about shaping a world where his daughter would never have to shrink herself to be accepted. Rachel, Daniel said, holding the phone steady. There's one more thing I haven't shown you yet. I'm listening, she replied. I recorded my conversation with Claire yesterday. The whole thing. Every comment about guys like me, the status gap, the implication that this was all part of a plan. It's all there. There was a pause on the line. Then Rachel's voice dropped. Daniel, do you realize what that means?
He did.
And he didn't flinch. She didn't just cross a legal line. She built a trap.
Targeted me.
And admitted it on tape. That's not just discrimination, Rachel said quietly. That's coordinated harm. That's a criminal case, Daniel. This could change everything. Later that night, Daniel sat beside Leah at the kitchen table, helping her with a school assignment about the civil rights movement. She looked up suddenly and asked, Dad, why do some people think they're better than others just because of skin color? Daniel paused, heart heavy, and chose his words with care. Sometimes, baby, people who've never had to struggle start to believe they're more important. They think comfort equals worth. But they forget we're all the same where it matters. Leah frowned. So, what do we do when we meet people like that? Daniel exhaled slowly, thinking of Claire sitting somewhere, still convinced she'd won. We prove them wrong, not with shouting, not with hate, but with truth, facts, and always standing tall for what's right. What Claire didn't know was that Daniel wasn't alone. For years, he'd been building something far more powerful than just a case. He had allies, reporters, legal minds, advocates, and others like him who'd been overlooked, silenced, and underestimated.
And now?
They were ready. His suspension gave him something he hadn't had in years: time. Time to fully activate the network he'd quietly built. Connections he'd nurtured behind the scenes while holding down a full-time job in a system designed to overlook people like him. That Friday, while Claire enjoyed a lavish lunch uptown with Janice McAllister, bragging about how she'd handled a potential PR disaster, Daniel was on a secure video call with representatives from the Department of Justice. He laid it all out: documents, recordings, patterns, statistics. Enough to shatter reputations and open the door to a full-blown federal case. When the meeting ended and Daniel closed his laptop, he exhaled slowly. Then came the smile. Not out of vengeance, but peace. It was the smile of a man who had trusted the long game, who knew that justice, real justice, doesn't shout. It waits, then strikes. And when it does, it doesn't miss. Monday started like any other for Claire. Morning espresso, polished briefings, a boardroom full of nodding heads. She was mid-sentence reviewing a pitch deck when Tasha from HR appeared in her doorway, pale and visibly shaken. "Claire," she said quietly, "we have a situation." Claire didn't even look up. What now? Did Daniel go crawling to some bargain lawyer trying to stir the pot? Tasha stepped inside, closed the door gently behind her, and approached. "It's not a lawyer," she said. "It's the FBI." Claire froze. "What are you saying?" Tasha swallowed hard. "They're here. Agents. There's an open investigation, allegations of systemic discrimination, and someone's handed over damning evidence. Emails, recordings, altered HR evaluations. Everything." She hesitated, then added, "Daniel's name is all over it, and not the way you hoped." Just then, the office door swung open. Two agents stepped inside, followed closely by Mr. Ellison, the CEO, his face hollow, jaw clenched. He didn't say a word. "Ms. Whitman," one of the agents said, flashing a badge. "I'm Special Agent Harris. We need to speak with you regarding your role in a pattern of discriminatory conduct inside this company." Claire didn't answer. She couldn't, because for the first time in her career, she wasn't in control. Claire tried to hold it together, but the slight tremble in her hands gave her away. "Of course," she said, forcing a polite smile. "But I'm still unclear why all this is necessary." Without a word, the lead agent tapped his tablet and pressed play. Her own voice filled the room. "The problem with people like him is they don't know their place. They grow up thinking they deserve the same treatment as those who've actually earned it." The color drained from Claire's face. That was taken completely out of context. "I was referring to..." The next clip started before she could finish. A single black man versus a respected white woman. Sure, courts care more these days, but in the end, credibility still wins. Mr. Ellison stood up, so fast his chair nearly tipped. His voice cracked. "Claire, please tell me that's not your voice." But the damage was only beginning. The agent slid a thick folder across the table. "These are transcripts of your phone calls from the last 6 months, all lawfully obtained, based on a formal complaint outlining a pattern of targeted discrimination." Claire flipped through the pages, her breath catching. There it all was, every remark, every biased decision, every smug confession. All with dates. All backed by context. "Who gave you this?" she whispered. The agent didn't flinch. "Daniel Brooks. Along with clear proof that the accusations you made against him were fabricated, motivated entirely by racial bias." He laid out more evidence, Security logs showing she had taken that so-called incriminating photo hours after Daniel had already left her home. Footage from her own building confirmed it. And there's more, the agent said. Records show you accessed the HR system without authorization to alter performance reviews for Black and Latino staff, lowering their scores to block their advancement. Mr. Ellison stood again, his voice filled with fury. Claire, do you have any idea what you've done? You've jeopardized our government contracts, our reputation, everything we've built. I can explain, she stammered. There is no explanation. He turned to the agents. She's terminated, effective immediately. The company will cooperate with whatever you need. If you love this story, kindly share it, like, and subscribe for more.